The hostess looked me up and down before whispering into her headset.
I'm checking on your reservation.
There's an older woman here
I
claiming
can't pretend
to be
any longer.
Mr. Garcia's
This ends
mother.
now.
How could
Claiming.
you? And everything we've been
I
through.
stood there in my navy blue
Look,
dress,
that's his mother.
holding the invitation
I heard
my
he didn't
son
want
had
her
mailed
here.
to me himself.
My own son, ashamed.
Around me, wealthy guests laughed beneath crystal chandeliers, while cameras flashed across Adrian's brand new restaurant in downtown Dallas. Then my son walked over. Not to hug me, not to welcome me. Instead, Adrian forced a smile and quietly said, "Mom, please don't sit with the investors tonight. You don't really fit the image we're trying to create." A few people nearby heard him, and in that moment, something inside me broke. Because Adrian had no idea the business he was protecting from embarrassment legally belonged to me. If you've ever been hurt by someone you sacrificed everything for, I want you to stay with me until the end of this story. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? Don't forget to like and subscribe if stories like this speak to your heart. Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I wasn't always the kind of woman people ignored at fancy restaurants. There was a time when I laughed loudly without apologizing for it. A time when my hands were soft instead of cracked from years of bleach water and kitchen burns. A time when my husband, Carlos Garcia, would pull me into the middle of our tiny living room and dance with me while old Spanish songs played on the radio. Back then, our life wasn't glamorous, but it was warm. Carlos owned a small auto repair shop outside San Antonio, and I worked mornings at a diner. We never had much money, but we had enough. Enough food on the table. Enough love in the house. Enough dreams to believe our son Adrian would someday have an easier life than we did. Then Carlos died on a Thursday afternoon in July. Just like that. One heart attack. One phone call. One moment that split my life into before and after. Adrian was only 17. I still remember the way he looked standing beside me at the hospital. Taller than me, already trying to act strong while his entire body shook. He held my hand so tightly that night, I thought my fingers might break. "I'll take care of you now, Mom," he whispered. But he was still a boy, and boys shouldn't have to become men overnight. So I told him no. I told him his only job was to finish school and chase the future his father wanted for him. I became the one who carried everything. I picked up double shifts at the diner first, then triple shifts when the bills started piling up. I cleaned hotel rooms during the day and served coffee at night. On weekends, I baked empanadas and tres leches cakes to sell outside churches and flea markets. Some nights, I slept less than 3 hours. Some months, I skipped meals so Adrian wouldn't notice the refrigerator getting emptier. But I never let him see how scared I was. That became my greatest talent as a mother. Hiding fear. Adrian was smart. Smarter than anyone in our family before him. He loved cooking almost as much as he loved business. By the time he graduated high school, he could turn leftovers into meals that tasted like they belonged in expensive restaurants. Carlos used to joke about it. "One day this boy's gonna feed millionaires." After Carlos died, Adrian held onto that dream like it was oxygen. And honestly, so did I. Because dreams were the only thing keeping us alive. When Adrian got accepted into the University of Texas business program, I cried in the parking lot after opening the letter. Not because I was sad, because I had no idea how I was going to pay for it. Tuition looked impossible. Rent looked impossible. Life itself looked impossible. But I smiled when I walked back into the apartment. "You're going," I told him. "Mom, we can't afford this. We'll figure it out." And we did. Or rather, I did. I took out loans. I sold my jewelry. I sold Carlos's old truck, even though it broke my heart watching another man drive it away. I stopped buying new clothes completely. I learned how to stretch one chicken into 4 meals. Every sacrifice felt worth it whenever Adrian came home excited about classes or internships or restaurant concepts he wanted to create someday. Back then, he still looked at me with love in his eyes. Back then, he still hugged me every time he saw me. He used to sit at the kitchen table late at night while I packed lunches for work. One day, he'd say, "I'm gonna buy you a house so big you'll never have to clean another room again." I would laugh and tell him I didn't need a big house. I just need my son, and I meant it. Years later, after Adrian graduated, he came to me with a business plan clutched in his hands. His eyes were glowing the same way Carlos's used to glow when he talked about opening his repair shop. "I found the perfect place in Austin," Adrian said breathlessly. "It's small, but the location is incredible. I can make this work, Mom. I know I can." I remember reading every page of that business proposal, even though I barely understood half the financial terms. But I understood him. I understood hope. The problem was money. Banks rejected him twice because he was too young and had no business history. Investors weren't interested either. To them, Adrian was just another ambitious kid with restaurant dreams. But to me, he was my son. So I did something that changed both our lives forever. I sold our house, the last real thing Carlos had left us. I can still remember standing inside that empty living room after the furniture was gone. The walls looked smaller somehow, colder. That house held every memory of our family. Adrian's first steps, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, the last dance I ever shared with my husband in the kitchen, and I let it go. Because I believed in my son more than I believed in my own future. When I handed Adrian the cashier's check, his hands trembled. "Mom," his voice cracked. "You can't give me all of this. I can. But what if I fail?" I grabbed his face the same way I used to when he was little. Then we fail together. Tears filled his eyes instantly. He wrapped his arms around me so tightly I could barely breathe. I swear he whispered against my shoulder, "I'll make you proud." And for a long time, he did. But success changes some people slowly. So slowly, you don't notice the transformation until the person you love no longer recognizes you standing right in front of them. Adrian's first restaurant was barely bigger than a 2-car garage. It sat on a crowded corner in Austin, between a tattoo shop and a laundromat, with flickering neon lights outside and barely enough room for 12 tables inside. The kitchen was so tiny that if 2 people turned around at the same time, somebody got burned. But to Adrian, it was a palace. I still remember the first morning we unlocked the doors together. He stood there, staring at the empty dining room, with tears in his eyes, while holding a ring of cheap silver keys. "We actually did it," he whispered. No, he did not do it alone. We did it. That first year nearly killed both of us. Adrian worked 18-hour days, trying to prove himself, and I spent almost every free moment helping keep the restaurant alive. I wasn't officially on payroll because Adrian insisted he couldn't afford it yet, but I didn't care. I washed dishes when the dishwasher quit after 3 weeks. I wiped tables. I folded napkins at midnight. I stood behind the register whenever employees called out sick. Some mornings, I woke up at 4 to prep ingredients before heading to my diner shift across town. Then I'd come back after work and help close the restaurant. There were nights Adrian fell asleep sitting upright in the office chair with invoices still in his hands. And there were nights I covered him with my sweater the same way I used to cover him with blankets when he was a child. Back then, success felt simple. It wasn't about money. It was about survival, about family, about proving to ourselves that every sacrifice had meant something. Little by little, people started noticing Adrian's food. A local food blogger wrote an article calling him Austin's hidden culinary genius. Then another influencer posted a video of Adrian cooking tableside guacamole that went viral overnight. Suddenly, lines stretched outside the restaurant. Reservations became impossible to get. Young professionals flooded in with expensive watches and designer shoes, taking photos of tacos that Adrian once learned to make from my mother in our tiny kitchen. I should have been angry seeing wealthy strangers profit from recipes born out of poverty. But honestly, I was proud. So proud. One night after closing, Adrian spun me around the empty dining room, laughing like a little boy again. "We made it, Mom," I laughed too. For a moment, it felt like Carlos was there with us. But success has a strange smell. At first, it smells sweet. Then eventually, if you're not careful, it starts smelling like ego. Rachel Bennett entered Adrian's life during the second year. She walked into the restaurant wearing white designer heels that looked completely ridiculous for Austin sidewalks. She had glossy blonde hair, perfect makeup, and the kind of confidence that made everyone around her suddenly feel less important. She was beautiful, the kind of beautiful that attracts attention the second she enters a room. At first, I liked her. She complimented Adrian constantly and posted glamorous videos of the restaurant online. Her followers exploded after she began featuring his food. Reservations doubled within months. Adrian was fascinated by her, and Rachel knew it. The first time she met me, she smiled politely and kissed my cheek. "So you're Adrian's adorable mother?" she said. Adorable. I remember that word bothering me for reasons I couldn't explain. Over time, Rachel became part of the business. Not officially, but socially. She started helping Adrian redesign the restaurant image. According to her, the place needed to feel luxury casual instead of working class authentic. I didn't even understand what that meant. But suddenly, the music changed. The menu prices doubled. The walls became darker. The old family photos we had hung near the kitchen disappeared one by one. Even my mother's handwritten tortilla recipe framed beside the register vanished during renovations. When I asked Adrian about it, he barely looked up from his laptop. Rachel thinks the branding should feel cleaner. Cleaner. That word hurt more than he realized. As if our history looked dirty. Still, I stayed quiet. Because mothers become experts at swallowing pain when it comes to their children. The changes didn't stop there. Rachel started correcting the way I spoke in front of customers. "Maybe don't say Han so much," she told me once with a fake smile. "The clientele here is a little more upscale now." Another time, she pulled Adrian aside after hearing me speak Spanish with a kitchen employee. Later that night, Adrian awkwardly told me maybe we should keep things professional around guests. Professional. I stared at him so long he couldn't meet my eyes afterward. That was the first moment I felt something cold settle between us. Not anger, distance. And distance grows quietly before it destroys families loudly. As Adrian's popularity grew, so did his embarrassment. At least, that's what it felt like. He stopped introducing me as the woman who helped build the restaurant. Instead, he'd vaguely say things like, "This is my mom." Nothing more. At networking events, he'd drift away mid-conversation if I talked too much. If investors visited, he suddenly wanted me working in the back instead of near customers. One evening, I overheard Rachel laughing with another woman near the bar. "She's sweet," Rachel said softly, "but Adrian's mother really doesn't fit the brand anymore." I stood frozen behind the hallway corner, holding a tray of fresh churros. The brand, not the family, not the business. The brand. That night, Adrian found me crying behind the restaurant near the dumpsters. "Mom, what happened?" I wiped my face quickly. "Nothing." But he knew me too well. "Did someone say something to you I should have told him?" I should have told him everything. Instead, I forced a smile and lied. "I'm just tired." He hugged me then, and for a second, I felt my son again. I'm doing all this for us, he whispered. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him. But people who build their identity around impressing strangers eventually start resenting anyone who reminds them where they came from. And I was the biggest reminder of all. Still, I never imagined Adrian would someday look me in the eyes and ask me not to embarrass him. Not after everything. Not after I gave him every piece of my life. The morning of Adrian's grand opening felt strangely emotional from the moment I woke up. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror longer than usual, studying every line on my face. Aging doesn't happen all at once. It sneaks up on you in pieces. A wrinkle near your mouth, silver hair above your ears, tiredness that sleep no longer fixes. But that morning, I wanted to look beautiful. Not for strangers, for my son, and maybe for Carlos too. I opened my closet and carefully pulled out the navy blue dress I had bought 2 weeks earlier from a clearance rack outside a department store. It wasn't expensive, but the fabric flowed softly around my body, and the color reminded me of the dress I wore during Adrian's high school graduation. I remembered standing beside Carlos's grave afterward, telling him our son was going to do incredible things. I never imagined success would eventually push us apart. I curled my hair slowly that morning, burning my finger twice because my hands shook from nervousness. Then I opened the small velvet box I hadn't touched in years. Inside was Carlos's silver watch. The glass was scratched, and the leather band had cracked with age, but it still smelled faintly like his cologne when I held it close enough. I fastened it around my wrist carefully. You should be here, I whispered to the empty room. For a moment, grief hit me so hard I had to sit down. Carlos would have loved seeing Adrian's success. He would have walked through that restaurant grinning proudly at every customer, telling strangers embarrassing childhood stories, while Adrian rolled his eyes, pretending to hate it. Carlos never cared about appearances. He cared about people. That was the difference. Around 6 that evening, I drove to downtown Dallas alone. Adrian had offered to send a driver earlier in the week, but the message felt more formal than loving, like something written by an assistant. The restaurant glowed from half a block away. Massive windows reflected city lights, while photographers crowded near the entrance capturing guests as they arrived in expensive cars. Women stepped onto the sidewalk in gowns that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Men wore watches worth more than the house I sold for Adrian years ago. For a second, I almost turned around. I suddenly felt too small for the world my son had built, but then I remembered every sacrifice that helped create it. So I lifted my chin and walked toward the entrance. The hostess smiled automatically at first. Then her expression changed when she looked closer at me. "Good evening," she said politely. "Name Mia Garcia." Her fingers moved across the tablet screen, then paused. Her smile faded slightly. "I'm sorry," she said. "I don't see your name on the VIP guest list." I blinked. "That can't be right. I'm Adrian's mother." The hostess gave a tight little nod, like she'd heard strange claims before. One moment, she stepped aside and whispered something into her headset while glancing back at me twice. People entering behind me began staring. An older Hispanic woman standing awkwardly outside a luxury restaurant didn't exactly blend into Adrian's new image. Heat crept up my neck. I pulled the invitation from my purse quickly and handed it over. The hostess examined it. "Well," she said carefully, "this invitation grants general admission, but tonight's investor dinner is private. General admission." I stared at her in confusion. My son had mailed me an invitation to his own event, but somehow I wasn't important enough for the main room. Before I could respond, a voice behind me laughed softly. "Oh my God, Are you Adrian's mom? I turned to see Rachel Bennett approaching in a shimmering gold dress that hugged her body like liquid light. Cameras flashed instantly when people recognized her. Rachel air-kissed my cheek carefully, making sure not to smudge her makeup. "You made it?" she said brightly. I forced a smile. "The hostess says there's a problem with the seating." Rachel's smile tightened almost invisibly. "Oh," she said slowly. "Tonight's just very exclusive. Mostly investors and media personalities." I stared at her. "I'm his mother." "Of course you are." She laughed lightly. Nobody's denying that. The way she said it made my stomach twist. Like motherhood itself wasn't impressive enough anymore. Rachel lowered her voice. "Adrian's under a lot of pressure tonight. The branding, the investors, the press coverage, it's all extremely high stakes." Branding, there was that word again, as if families were marketing problems. Before I could answer, another couple walked past us toward the entrance. Rachel's entire face transformed instantly into influencer perfection. "Oh my gosh, you made it!" she squealed, hugging the woman dramatically. I stood there invisible while cameras flashed around them. The hostess avoided eye contact with me now. That hurt more than outright cruelty, because indifference makes you feel less than human. I checked my phone. No messages from Adrian. I texted him again. "They won't let me inside the investor section." 3 dots appeared briefly, then disappeared. No answer. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Guests continued pouring inside while soft jazz music drifted through the open doors. I suddenly became aware of how old I looked standing there alone. A valet whispered something to another employee while glancing toward me. Both of them laughed quietly. Maybe they weren't laughing about me, but humiliation makes every whisper sound personal. Eventually, the hostess approached again. "Mr. Garcia will speak with you shortly." "Mr. Garcia, not Adrian, not your son. Mr. Garcia." That was when I truly understood something had changed permanently between us. Success had given my son a new identity. And somehow, there was no longer room for me inside it. Finally, after nearly 20 minutes, Adrian appeared near the entrance. For one foolish second, relief flooded through me. He looked so handsome. Tailored black suit, perfect haircut, confidence radiating from him like expensive cologne. My little boy had become powerful, but the moment his eyes landed on me, I saw irritation flash across his face. Not happiness, not love. I felt my chest tighten instantly. Adrian walked over quickly, glancing around to see who might be watching. "Mom," he said under his breath. "What are you doing out here?" I stared at him in disbelief. They said I can't sit with the guests, instead of anger toward the staff, instead of protecting me. My son sighed. Actually sighed, like I was creating a problem for him. I stared at my son, waiting for him to correct the situation, waiting for him to laugh awkwardly and say there had been some misunderstanding, waiting for him to put an arm around my shoulders and proudly tell the hostess, "This woman built everything you see here." But Adrian didn't do any of those things. Instead, he glanced toward the dining room where wealthy investors mingled beneath sparkling chandeliers. Then he lowered his voice. "Mom tonight is complicated. Complicated." I felt my throat tighten. "What does that mean?" Adrian rubbed the back of his neck impatiently, a habit he'd had since he was a teenager, whenever he wanted to avoid conflict. "It just means..." He sighed. "The investor table is reserved for business partners, media people, and franchise executives." I blinked slowly. "And I'm not family. That's not what I said." "But it is what you meant." His jaw tightened instantly. Around us, Guests pretended not to stare while absolutely staring. I could feel their curiosity crawling across my skin. Who was this older woman making the successful restaurant owner uncomfortable? Adrian stepped closer and forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mom, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. Harder. I almost laughed at the cruelty of that word. Because nothing about my life had ever been easy. Not burying my husband, not raising Adrian alone, not working myself into exhaustion for 20 years so he could stand in this glittering building, pretending he came from somewhere better than me. Rachel suddenly appeared beside Adrian, like she could smell tension from across the room. Everything about her looked polished. Perfect hair, perfect smile, perfect timing. Is everything okay? She asked sweetly. Adrian answered before I could. Yeah, just figuring out seating. Rachel nodded sympathetically at me, though there wasn't a single ounce of genuine warmth in her expression. We actually set up a quieter table near the private hallway, she explained gently. It'll probably be more comfortable for you there anyway. More comfortable. Near the hallway, near the kitchen. Like an old woman should be hidden somewhere out of sight. I looked directly at Adrian. You want me sitting in the back? His silence answered first. Then finally, Mom. These people are important. The words hit harder than I expected. Because once upon a time, I used to be important to him too. I swallowed carefully. And what am I? For a brief second, guilt flashed across Adrian's face. I saw it. Saw the little boy he used to be, fighting somewhere underneath the expensive suit and polished image. But then he looked over his shoulder toward the investors watching from inside. And the moment disappeared. You're my mother, he said quietly. But tonight is about business. Business. It amazed me how easily success teaches people to separate love from usefulness. One of the staff members approached awkwardly. Mr. Garcia, the Lang party just arrived. Adrian straightened instantly. His entire energy shifted. Excitement, focus, ambition. He looked at me quickly. Please, just cooperate tonight, okay? Then he turned to the hostess. Can someone escort her to the secondary table? Her. Not Mom, not my mother. Her. The hostess nodded politely. This way, ma'am. I couldn't move for a second. Something inside my chest felt numb. Not dramatic heartbreak like in movies. Something quieter. More dangerous. The realization that the person you love most in the world no longer sees your humanity clearly. I followed the hostess through the restaurant while conversations buzzed around us. The main dining area looked stunning. Huge floral arrangements, live violin music, waiters carrying trays of champagne. At the center of the room stood a long, elegant table beneath hanging gold lights. A sign near it read, Founder's Table. I slowed down instinctively, and there it was. The final wound, Adrian's name, Rachel's name, Victor Lang's name, several investors, several executives, but not mine. I stared at the table so long, the hostess awkwardly cleared her throat. My name had been erased from the story completely. The woman who sold her house. The woman who washed dishes. The woman who worked herself half to death to build this business. Gone. Replaced by people who arrived after success already existed. The hostess guided me farther back toward a narrow side corridor near the kitchen entrance. The sound changed immediately there. Less music, more clattering dishes, more staff rushing around, sweating beneath fluorescent lights. A tiny round table sat awkwardly against the wall near a service station. Two older distant relatives from Adrian's father's side were already seated there looking uncomfortable. One of them gave me a pitying smile. That nearly broke me. Pity is worse than cruelty sometimes. because pity confirms everyone can see your humiliation. "I'll have someone bring you champagne," the hostess said quickly before hurrying away. I sat down slowly. For several minutes, I couldn't even process what had happened. I just stared at the white tablecloth while voices echoed from the glamorous dining room nearby. I kept remembering Adrian as a little boy. Sticky hands, big brown eyes, running toward me after school yelling, "Mom, how does someone go from loving you like oxygen to treating you like an inconvenience?" I honestly didn't know. Then suddenly applause erupted from the main dining room. I looked up. Adrian had stepped onto a small stage area near the investor table. Spotlights illuminated him while cameras flashed. He looked confident, powerful, completely at home in a world that suddenly had no place for me. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Adrian began smoothly. The crowd applauded again. I listened as he thanked his investors first. Then his management team. Then Rachel, especially Rachel. My incredible partner, he called her proudly. Rachel smiled modestly while guests clapped. My stomach twisted, not because he loved someone else, but because I realized something horrifying. Adrian spoke about struggle, about sacrifice, about believing in yourself when nobody else does, and not once did he mention me. Not the woman who financed his dream. Not the mother who sacrificed her home. Not the person who stood beside him before anybody cared who he was. It felt like watching myself disappear publicly. Then, halfway through the applause, a deep male voice suddenly spoke beside me. "Well, this doesn't make any sense." I turned sharply. A tall, silver-haired man in an expensive charcoal suit stood near my table, staring directly at me. I recognized him immediately from Adrian's stories and magazine interviews. Victor Lang, the biggest investor in Adrian's company. Victor looked genuinely confused, then shocked. "Wait," he said slowly. "You're Mia Garcia." I nodded cautiously. His eyebrows rose. "But Adrian told us you rarely involved yourself in the business." Something cold settled into my stomach instantly, because the look on Victor's face told me one thing very clearly. My son had been telling people a very different story about how he became successful. Victor Lang kept staring at me like he had just discovered a missing piece of a puzzle. Meanwhile, my heart pounded so hard I could barely hear the music anymore. "What do you mean?" I asked carefully. Victor frowned. "Adrian told investors you were mostly retired and uninvolved." He glanced toward the stage where Adrian continued speaking confidently beneath golden lights. "Honestly, I assumed you were just emotionally supportive." Emotionally supportive. I almost laughed, as if emotional support alone could have built that restaurant from nothing. Victor pulled out the empty chair beside me. "May I sit?" I nodded slowly. The second he sat down, I noticed something uncomfortable in his expression. Not cruelty. Confusion. Like he suddenly realized the version of Adrian he'd invested millions into might not be entirely real. On stage, Adrian lifted a champagne glass. "When I started this journey," he announced proudly, "I had nothing except determination and vision." Applause filled the room. I stared at him in disbelief. "Nothing. I sold my house. I destroyed my retirement. I buried my own dreams alive so his could survive." But according to Adrian, he had built everything alone. Victor leaned closer. "You know," he said quietly, "most founders love telling the story of where they came from. Investors eat that stuff up." I swallowed hard. "My son used to talk about family all the time?" Victor's face darkened slightly. "He doesn't anymore." Those 4 words landed heavily between us. Across the room, Rachel stood near the stage, smiling proudly while photographers snapped pictures of her. She looked like she belonged there. Elegant, confident, perfect for magazines and investor presentations. And suddenly, I understood something painful. Rachel wasn't just Adrian's girlfriend anymore. She was part of the image he wanted to sell. And I no longer matched it. The speeches continued while waiters served appetizers to the main dining area. Our little table near the kitchen received food almost 20 minutes later. Cold food. Cold enough that the cheese on the empanadas had already hardened. One of Carlos's cousins muttered under his breath, "Guess we're not priority guests." I forced a smile, but shame crawled deeper beneath my skin. Because humiliation becomes unbearable when witnesses exist. Then Adrian began introducing key people connected to the business: management staff, marketing directors, brand consultants. Then Rachel stepped onto the stage beside him. The room brightened instantly at the sight of her. Adrian wrapped an arm around her waist naturally. "I also need to thank the woman who believed in this vision before anyone else did," he said warmly. Rachel placed a manicured hand over her chest dramatically while guests smiled. I couldn't have done this without her. The crowd applauded again, and something inside me cracked open. Not because he thanked Rachel, but because I suddenly remembered another night years earlier. Adrian sitting at our tiny kitchen table crying after the bank rejected his loan application. "I'm never gonna make this happen," he whispered back then. I had reached across the table and placed the deed to our house in front of him. "You already are," I told him. That was the night I believed we were building a future together. But now I was watching another woman receive credit for sacrifices she never made. Victor noticed my expression immediately. "You okay?" I nodded too quickly. "Just tired." It was the same lie I'd been telling for years. On stage, Rachel took the microphone gracefully. "I always knew Adrian was destined for greatness," she said. The audience melted instantly. She knew exactly how to speak to wealthy people. Everything polished, everything inspirational. Then she laughed lightly. "When we met, he was still running this little neighborhood restaurant with almost no structure at all." The crowd chuckled politely. My stomach tightened, because I knew what she really meant. Poor, messy, too ethnic, too small, too close to people like me. Rachel continued, "But I saw potential. Potential. As if Adrian's life only became valuable once people like her approved of it." I suddenly couldn't breathe properly anymore, so I excused myself quietly and walked toward the hallway beside the kitchen. The farther I moved from the main dining room, the quieter the applause became. Back there, reality still existed. Sweating cooks, overworked servers, burned pans, nothing glamorous, nothing fake. I leaned against the wall, trying to steady myself. That's when I heard voices coming from Adrian's private office nearby. Rachel's voice first. "You handled your mother terribly tonight." I froze instantly. Adrian sighed heavily. "What was I supposed to do? You could have at least prepared her better. She doesn't understand how these events work." I felt something twist painfully in my chest. Rachel lowered her voice. She looked completely out of place. Out of place. The words echoed through me. Adrian didn't answer immediately, and somehow his silence hurt worse than agreement. Finally, he spoke quietly. "Look, investors expect a certain image. If they think this company still operates like some family taco shop, they'll lose confidence." Family taco shop. I closed my eyes. That family taco shop had once been his dream. Rachel spoke again. "Victor already questioned me earlier about ownership structure." Adrian cursed softly under his breath. "He worries too much. You told him everything's secured, right?" "Yes. And your mother signed the updated collateral agreements." A strange chill ran through me instantly. Collateral agreements. What agreements? Adrian answered too quickly. Everything's handled. Rachel sounded uncertain. She knows how much debt you took on number silence? Then Rachel spoke carefully. Adrian, these expansion numbers are getting risky. I know what I'm doing. You better. My pulse began hammering violently. Debt collateral expansion. I stepped closer to the office door without thinking. Inside, Adrian lowered his voice further. Once the franchise deal closes next quarter, we'll flip half the locations anyway. And if your mother starts asking questions? Adrian laughed softly. A cold, dismissive laugh I had never heard from him before. My mom doesn't understand business. The words hit harder than any slap ever could. Not because they were cruel, because they were sincere. He truly believed it. After everything I sacrificed, after everything I built beside him, my son genuinely saw me as some ignorant old woman standing in the way of success. I backed away from the office slowly before they could hear me breathing. My legs felt weak. For years, I had convinced myself Adrian was just stressed, too busy, too ambitious, too influenced by Rachel. But standing there outside that office, listening to him erase me piece by piece, I finally understood the truth. Success hadn't changed my son overnight. It had revealed who he was becoming little by little, and somewhere along the way, he stopped seeing me as family. I returned to my table mechanically. Victor looked up immediately. You all right? Before I could answer, he studied my face carefully. Then he lowered his voice. Mia, how involved are you in the ownership side of this company? The question made my stomach drop instantly, because suddenly, I wasn't sure anymore. Victor's question followed me long after the dinner ended. How involved are you in the ownership side of this company? At the time, I gave him a vague answer. I helped Adrian start the first restaurant. Victor nodded politely, but I could tell he wanted specifics. Percentages, contracts, liability, real business details. The truth was, I had never cared much about paperwork. I trusted my son. That was my first mistake. By the time I left the restaurant that night, Dallas was wrapped in cold midnight rain. Valets rushed wealthy guests beneath umbrellas while luxury cars lined the street glowing beneath city lights. No one noticed me leaving alone. Not Adrian, not Rachel, not anybody. I sat inside my old Honda for nearly 10 minutes before turning the key. My reflection in the windshield looked exhausted. Older than 63. Older than grief. There's a special kind of heartbreak that comes from realizing your child is ashamed of the life that raised him. And somehow, that pain feels even worse than betrayal from strangers. Because children know exactly where to hurt you. The drive home felt endless. Every memory replayed itself differently now. Every sacrifice. Every promise. Every moment Adrian slowly replaced gratitude with ambition. When I finally got home, my apartment felt painfully quiet. I kicked off my shoes, poured myself tea, and sat at the tiny kitchen table, where unpaid bills still waited beside grocery coupons. Meanwhile, my son drank champagne with millionaires. I should have been proud. Instead, I felt hollow. My phone buzzed suddenly around 1:30 in the morning. Sophia Moreno. I frowned immediately. Sophia had been Carlos's attorney for over 20 years. After his death, she occasionally helped me handle taxes or small legal paperwork, but she rarely called late at night. Mia, she said the second I answered. Her tone instantly alarmed me. What's wrong? I need to ask you something carefully. Papers shuffled on her end. Did you recently sign any refinancing documents connected to Adrian's parent company? I sat upright instantly. No. Silence. Then, are you sure? Yes. Another pause. Mia, Your signature appears on several expansion agreements filed within the last 6 months. My stomach dropped so hard it physically hurt. That's impossible. That's what concerns me. I gripped the edge of the table tightly. What kind of agreements? Commercial loans, equipment financing, property leverage documents. Sophia hesitated, and one very large collateral agreement. The room suddenly felt too small. I don't understand any of this. You need to. Fear crept slowly into my chest. Not fear for myself. Fear for Adrian? Because something about Sophia's voice told me this situation had already become dangerous. I'll come by tomorrow, she said quietly. Don't discuss this with anyone yet. After hanging up, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Adrian saying, "My mom doesn't understand business." Maybe he believed that. But I understood dishonesty, and something inside me knew my son was hiding far more than embarrassment. The next afternoon, Sophia arrived carrying 2 thick folders and a laptop bag. She had always intimidated me slightly. Sharp suits, sharp eyes, sharp mind. Carlos used to joke that Sophia could scare confession out of criminals just by looking at them. The second she sat down at my kitchen table, I knew this wasn't going to be a simple conversation. She opened the first folder carefully. "Mia, before we discuss anything else, I need you to answer honestly." She slid several documents toward me. "Have you ever seen these?" I adjusted my glasses and looked down. Legal contracts, bank forms, loan authorizations, and there my signature, or something pretending to be it. I stared at the pages in disbelief. "That's not mine." Sophia nodded grimly. "I didn't think so." My hands began shaking. "How bad is this?" Sophia inhaled slowly before answering. "Potentially very bad." She explained everything piece by piece, though half the financial language still sounded foreign to me. Over the past year, Adrian had aggressively expanded his business operations. Too aggressively. New locations, luxury renovations, massive investor promises, private financing deals. And somewhere during that expansion, he began using assets connected to the original company structure. Assets still legally tied to me. I blinked repeatedly, trying to process it. "But Adrian owns the business." Sophia looked directly at me. "No, Mia. Not entirely." Then she opened another folder. Inside were original incorporation papers from years ago. Papers I barely remembered signing after selling my house. Sophia tapped the highlighted section carefully. "You are still majority owner of the parent company." I stared at her. "What?" "When Carlos died, he specifically instructed us to structure the business this way if family assets were used." She paused, especially the house sale. None of this made sense. "I thought Adrian transferred everything later." "He transferred operational control," Sophia corrected carefully. "But legally, the core ownership structure remained protected under your name." A cold chill moved through me, which meant every loan Adrian took, every expansion risk, every forged signature had been attached to me too. "Oh my God." Sophia's face softened slightly. "I know." I covered my mouth with trembling hands. "No, Adrian wouldn't." My voice cracked. "He wouldn't intentionally hurt me." Sophia stayed quiet too long. That silence terrified me more than words. Finally, she spoke gently. "I don't think Adrian started out trying to hurt anyone." I looked at her desperately. Then what happened? Success happened. Tears burned behind my eyes instantly. Sophia leaned back slowly. "Mia, I've seen this before. People expand too quickly. Investors pressure them. Lifestyle changes. Ego gets involved." She folded her hands together. "Eventually, they convince themselves rules no longer apply." I thought about the penthouse Adrian recently bought, the luxury vacations, the designer suits. Rachel's obsession with appearances, the expensive image they were selling. How much of it was built on debt? Sophia slid another paper toward me. This document concerns me most. I looked down. A collateral agreement tied to future franchise revenue. Large numbers filled the page, numbers I could barely comprehend. Then I saw it, my forged signature again. If these loans collapse, Sophia said carefully, creditors could pursue every connected asset. My voice dropped to a whisper. Even me? Yes. I felt physically sick. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked the question haunting me most. Could Adrian go to jail? Sophia hesitated. Forgery and financial fraud can become criminal matters depending on intent and damages. I closed my eyes. My son, my little boy, the same child who once cried because he accidentally stole candy from a gas station at age 7. How had we gotten here? Sophia's phone buzzed suddenly. She glanced at the screen, then frowned. What is it? I asked. Victor Lang. My stomach tightened instantly. Sophia answered quickly, listened for a moment, then muted the call. He's asking questions about company ownership. Fear flashed through me again. Does he know? Not yet. Sophia studied me carefully. But I think he suspects Adrian hasn't been fully honest. I looked down at the forged signatures again. My son's ambition had crossed into something darker now. Something illegal. Something dangerous. And for the first time in my life, I realized I might not be able to protect him anymore. That night, after Sophia left, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the folders spread across my kitchen table. Loan agreements, ownership structures, forged signatures. Words that suddenly felt heavier than bricks. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows while Dallas traffic hummed in the distance. Normally, those sounds comforted me. They reminded me life continued, no matter how broken one person felt. But not that night. That night, everything felt fragile, especially my memories of Adrian. I kept looking at the forged signatures, trying to convince myself there had to be some explanation. Maybe an accountant made a mistake. Maybe Adrian signed electronically without realizing what he was doing. Maybe no. Deep down, I already knew the truth. Those signatures weren't accidents. They were choices. And that realization hurt more than the humiliation at the restaurant. Because embarrassment fades. But betrayal from your own child settles into your bones. Around midnight, I finally stood up and walked toward the hallway closet. For years, I had avoided opening the old storage boxes stacked inside. Carlos's things. After he died, I packed away pieces of our life because looking at them hurt too much. But suddenly, I remembered something Sophia had said earlier. When Carlos helped structure the company, he insisted on several protections. Protections? At the time, I barely listened during those meetings. I trusted my husband completely, and later, I trusted Adrian completely too. Maybe that had been my second mistake. I pulled the boxes out slowly one by one until I found the small black lockbox Carlos used to keep important documents. The metal felt cold beneath my fingertips. For a second, I just sat there staring at it. I hadn't opened that box since the week after his funeral. My chest tightened painfully. "Help me," I whispered softly into the empty room. Then I unlocked it. Inside were old insurance papers, tax records, photographs, and neatly organized legal folders with Carlos's handwriting across the tabs. Carlos had always been meticulous, the opposite of me. Where I trusted emotionally, he prepared practically. One folder immediately caught my attention. Garcia's Hospitality Group founding documents. My pulse quickened. I carried the folder to the kitchen table and opened it carefully. Inside were copies of the original ownership agreements from Adrian's first restaurant. Highlighted sections, handwritten notes, Sophia's signature, Carlos's signature, mine. I adjusted my glasses and read slowly. The further I read, the colder I became. Carlos had created an emergency control clause years earlier. A clause giving majority authority to the primary asset holder, me. Not Adrian, me. I sat back in stunned silence. That couldn't be right. I grabbed another document, then another. Every single one confirmed the same thing. Because the startup capital came primarily from the sale of our family home, the majority ownership structure remained legally protected under my name unless formally transferred through specific legal procedures. Procedures that apparently never happened. Which meant Adrian had built an empire believing operational success made him untouchable, while legally standing on ground he didn't fully own. I covered my mouth with trembling fingers. Carlos. He had prepared for this possibility years ago. Not the fraud specifically, but the greed. Slowly, I unfolded one final paper tucked into the back of the folder. A letter. My husband's handwriting covered the page in dark blue ink. Mia. If you're reading this, something has probably gone wrong. First, let me say this clearly, none of these protections were created because I doubted Adrian's heart. I created them because success changes people faster than failure ever does, especially young men trying to prove themselves to the world. You love with trust. I love with preparation. That's why we worked so well together. Tears blurred my vision immediately. I kept reading. If Adrian ever loses himself chasing money, status, or pride, you must protect him even if he hates you for it, especially then. Because real love doesn't always rescue people from consequences. Sometimes real love forces them to face the truth before they destroy themselves completely. My breathing became uneven. I could practically hear Carlos's voice while reading the words. Steady, calm, certain. He knew our son. Maybe better than I wanted to admit. The letter continued. And Mia, never let anyone make you feel small for the sacrifices you made for this family. Adrian's future was built on your strength long before it was built on his talent. I finally broke down crying. Not graceful tears, not quiet tears, the kind that leave your chest aching afterward. For years I had allowed Adrian's success to shrink me. I let Rachel make me feel outdated. I let wealthy strangers make me feel uneducated. I let my own son make me feel unimportant inside the very business my sacrifices created. And somehow, I started believing them. That realization devastated me. Around 2 a.m, my phone buzzed. Adrian. I stared at the screen for several seconds before answering. Hey, he said casually. Casually, like he hadn't humiliated me publicly hours earlier. You got home okay? I almost laughed. That's what he called for. Not to apologize. Not to explain. Just to perform concern. Yes. Silence lingered awkwardly. Then Adrian sighed. Look about tonight. I waited. I didn't mean to upset you. Not, I'm sorry. Just, I didn't mean to upset you. Because people obsessed with image often apologize for reactions instead of actions. I glanced down at the forged documents spread across my table. Did you forge my signature? Silence. Instant silence. So sharp it felt physical. When Adrian finally spoke again, his voice had changed completely. Who told you that? My stomach twisted. You did, Mia. You forged my name. His breathing became audible over the phone. Then it's more complicated than that. There it was. The answer. I closed my eyes. How could you do this to me? You don't understand what's happening financially right now. Then explain it. Another pause. We needed leverage for expansion. We. Interesting how the word suddenly included me when responsibility appeared. You used my name without permission. You were never supposed to find out. The honesty of that statement nearly stopped my heart. Not regret, not shame, just inconvenience. I gripped the edge of the table harder. Adrian, you committed fraud. His tone sharpened immediately. Don't use that word, but it's true. You have no idea how business works at this level. I looked around my tiny apartment, at the bills, the old furniture, Carlos's letter, then at the ownership documents proving everything Adrian built rested on sacrifices he now dismissed as irrelevant. Maybe I didn't understand luxury branding. Maybe I didn't understand venture capital. But suddenly, I understood power, and for the first time in years, I realized something my son had forgotten completely. Legally, the business wasn't really his. Not entirely. Which meant if Adrian kept spiraling deeper into lies and debt, I was the only person left who could stop him. The next morning, I woke up feeling 20 years older. I barely slept after my phone call with Adrian. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard his voice again. You were never supposed to find out. Not once during that conversation had he sounded ashamed. Defensive, yes. Frustrated, absolutely. But ashamed? No. That realization haunted me more than the forged signatures themselves, because guilt means a conscience is still fighting. But entitlement convinces people they deserve forgiveness before they even apologize. I sat at my kitchen table holding Carlos's letter while sunlight slowly filled the apartment. For the first time in years, I asked myself a question I had been avoiding. Had I loved Adrian so blindly that I helped create this version of him? The thought broke my heart. Around 10 in the morning, I drove to Sofia Moreno's office downtown. The building itself intimidated me. Glass walls, marble floors, people in tailored suits moving quickly with expensive coffee cups and important expressions. I suddenly felt small again walking through those halls. But not as small as before, because now I carried truth with me, and truth changes the way you stand. Sophia greeted me immediately and led me into her private office. You look exhausted, she said gently. I feel exhausted. She nodded like she expected that answer. Legal folders already covered her desk. More paperwork, more numbers, more evidence proving my son had built his empire on lies. Sophia motioned for me to sit. I spent most of the night reviewing every document connected to Adrian's recent expansion. Something in her voice made my stomach tighten. How bad is it? She inhaled slowly, worse than I originally thought. Fear crawled up my spine instantly. Sophia opened a file and slid several pages toward me. These are the franchise commitments Adrian signed within the last 8 months. I stared blankly at the paperwork. The numbers meant little to me, but the stress on Sophia's face meant everything. He over-leveraged the company, she explained carefully. Massively. What does that mean? It means Adrian expanded faster than the business could safely support. She tapped one page sharply. He promised investors aggressive national growth while using existing company assets as collateral, including assets connected to me, including the original ownership structure, including the very house I sacrificed years ago. Sophia continued. The business appears successful publicly, but financially, she paused. It's balancing on a knife's edge. I swallowed hard. And the forged signatures. They made the financing possible. I stared at her in disbelief. So without my name, some of these loans would never have been approved. The room suddenly felt colder. I thought back to Adrian's luxury lifestyle, the penthouse apartment, The designer clothing, the high-profile investor events. How much of it had been real and how much was debt disguised as success? Sophia studied me quietly. Mia, there's something else. I braced myself. What? She hesitated before speaking. Victor Lang contacted me directly this morning. My pulse jumped immediately. What did he say? He's concerned about inconsistencies in the ownership disclosures Adrian provided investors. I closed my eyes briefly, so the cracks were already showing. Sophia folded her hands together carefully. If Victor discovers the forged signatures before we control the situation, this could escalate very quickly. How quickly? Civil lawsuits, financial fraud investigations, possibly criminal review. My chest tightened painfully. Criminal, my son, the same little boy who used to cry whenever he disappointed me. How had we ended up discussing criminal fraud? I looked down at my trembling hands. I don't want Adrian destroyed. Sophia's expression softened. I know, no matter what he's done. My voice cracked. He's still my son. Sophia leaned forward slightly. And that's exactly why you need to stop protecting him. The words hit hard, because deep down I knew she was right. For years I had excused Adrian's behavior, the arrogance, the distance, the embarrassment. I told myself success changed people temporarily. I convinced myself he was under pressure. I kept forgiving things that should have alarmed me. Maybe because mothers are terrified of admitting when their children become strangers. Sophia opened another document. This clause gives you emergency authority over operational activity if fraud or unauthorized liability threatens the parent company. I stared at the paper. The emergency shutdown clause. Carlos's protection. My protection. Adrian's protection too, whether he realized it or not. You can freeze expansion activity immediately, Sophia said. Potentially more. I looked up sharply. You mean shut everything down, if necessary. The words settled heavily between us. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, I whispered, I can't do that to him. Sophia's eyes sharpened instantly. Mia listened to me carefully. Her voice lowered. If this continues, Adrian could lose far more than his restaurants. I swallowed. What do you mean he's already crossing legal boundaries? She pointed at the forged signatures. People rarely stop once they start rationalizing fraud. They usually escalate. My stomach turned. He's not a criminal. Not intentionally, Sophia agreed. But desperation and ego create dangerous combinations. I thought about Adrian at 17 promising to take care of me. Then Adrian at 38 asking me not to embarrass him. The distance between those two men suddenly felt unbearable. Sophia's office phone rang softly. She glanced at the caller ID and frowned. Victor again. Answer it, I said quietly. Sophia hesitated before pressing speakerphone. Victor. Mia's there, isn't she? Victor asked immediately. Sophia looked at me. I nodded slowly. Yes, Sophia answered carefully. Victor exhaled heavily. I knew something felt wrong at that opening dinner. My throat tightened. Victor continued. Adrian pitched himself as a self-made founder with clean ownership structure. But the numbers stopped matching the narrative months ago. Sophia stayed calm. What exactly are you asking Victor? I'm asking whether Mia Garcia is actually the controlling owner. Silence filled the room. Then Victor spoke again, quieter this time. My team started reviewing the financing chain after the dinner. Some signatures appear inconsistent. My pulse pounded violently. Sophia answered carefully. We're reviewing everything internally. Victor cursed softly under his breath. That kid's in over his head. Kid. For the first time in months, someone spoke about Adrian like a vulnerable human being instead of a powerful entrepreneur. And somehow, that made me want to cry. Victor's voice softened slightly. Mia, I met hundreds of founders over the years. He paused. The dangerous ones aren't usually greedy at first. I listened silently. They just become addicted to proving they belong in rooms that once rejected them. The words hit painfully close to the truth, because Adrian had spent years trying to escape where he came from, and somewhere along the way, he started resenting the people who reminded him. Victor continued carefully. If you still have legal authority here, you need to intervene now. I closed my eyes, because suddenly everyone around me was saying the same thing. Sophia, Victor, Carlos's letter, all pointing toward the same unbearable truth. If I stayed silent, I wouldn't be protecting my son anymore. I'd be helping destroy him. I asked Adrian to meet me 3 days later. Not at his restaurant, not at his penthouse, not anywhere glamorous. I chose a small Mexican cafe outside San Antonio, where Carlos used to take us every Sunday after church when Adrian was little. The place hadn't changed much over the years. Same faded yellow walls, same squeaky booths, same smell of tortillas and coffee lingering in the air. Back when Adrian was a child, he loved this restaurant because the owner always gave him extra churros for free. Now I wondered if he'd even remember. I arrived early and sat near the window, twisting Carlos's old watch around my wrist nervously. Part of me still hoped this conversation would end differently. Part of me still believed if Adrian looked directly into my eyes and saw how much pain he caused the son I raised, would come back. That's the curse of motherhood. Hope survives long after evidence dies. Adrian arrived 20 minutes late. Designer coat, expensive sunglasses, phone glued to his hand. He kissed the air near my cheek distractedly before sliding into the booth. Sorry, he muttered. Investor calls all morning. Investor calls. Not how are you? Mom? Not I'm sorry for what happened. Just business. He glanced around the cafe with obvious discomfort. You picked this place? Yes. A waiter approached, smiling warmly. Coffee, Adrian. To my surprise, the waiter recognized him instantly. Adrian hesitated before nodding awkwardly. Once the waiter walked away, I noticed embarrassment flicker across his face. You still come here? He asked. Sometimes? He loosened his tie slightly. I haven't been here in years. I already knew that. People rarely revisit places connected to the version of themselves they're trying to escape. For several seconds, silence sat heavily between us. Finally, Adrian sighed. So what's this about straight to business again? No emotion, no concern. I folded my hands carefully. I spoke to Sophia. His entire body stiffened immediately. There it was. Fear, real fear. Not embarrassment, not irritation. Fear. Adrian leaned back slowly. She had no right contacting you. She contacted me because my forged signature appeared on financial documents. His jaw tightened instantly. We already discussed this. No, I said quietly. You avoided it. Adrian removed his sunglasses and rubbed his eyes tiredly. You don't understand how expansion financing works. There it is again. His head lifted. What you keep saying, I don't understand business. I swallowed hard, but I understand lying. He looked away. The waiter returned with coffee and menus, clearly sensing tension between us. Neither of us touched the menus after he left. Adrian finally lowered his voice. Mom! I was going to fix everything before you ever found out. I stared at him in disbelief. You forged my name? I had no choice. No choice. His frustration exploded instantly. Yes, no choice. Do you know how much pressure I'm under right now? Several customers glanced toward us. Adrian lowered his voice again, but the anger remained. You think restaurants run on family recipes and good intentions? We're dealing with investors, franchise contracts, payrolls, expansion deadlines. And whose fault is that? Silence. I leaned forward slightly. You built a life you couldn't afford to maintain. That's not true. Then why are you drowning in debt? His face hardened immediately. Victor talked to you. Enough people talk to me because apparently nobody trusts you anymore. That hit him harder than I expected. For the first time, I saw exhaustion beneath Adrian's polished appearance. Dark circles under his eyes, tension in his jaw. Tiny cracks beneath the expensive image. But instead of honesty, he chose pride. I know what I'm doing, he snapped. Do you? Yes? Then why did you use my name without permission? Adrian slammed a hand against the table softly in frustration. Because lenders trust stability. A few nearby customers looked over again. He lowered his voice. The original company structure carried stronger asset backing because of the house sale and parent ownership documents. So you used me? No. He shook his head aggressively. I used the structure. I almost laughed at the coldness of that distinction. People who lose their morality always start speaking like lawyers instead of humans. I studied my son carefully. When did money become more important than family? Adrian's expression changed instantly. This isn't about money. Then what is it about? His answer came fast. Respect. I blinked. What he leaned forward, eyes burning now. You have no idea what it's like walking into rooms where everyone assumes you're less intelligent because you didn't come from money. I stayed quiet. Adrian continued. Investors judge everything. Your clothes, your accent, the way you speak, the people standing beside you. The words hurt, because now he was finally admitting it openly. He had been ashamed of me. I spent years trying to prove I belonged, he whispered bitterly. And I helped you do that. Yes, but you don't understand. No, Adrian. My voice cracked sharply. You don't understand. He stopped talking. I could feel tears building now. I cleaned hotel bathrooms so you could stand in those rooms confidently someday. My hands trembled. I sold my home so you could chase your dreams. My voice lowered painfully. And somewhere along the way, you started treating me like evidence of a life you wanted erased. For a second, guilt flickered across his face. Real guilt. But then pride buried it again. That's not fair. Neither was humiliating me in front of your investors. He looked down silently. Finally, I asked the question haunting me most. How much debt are you actually in? Adrian hesitated too long. My stomach dropped. How much temporary debt isn't unusual during expansion? Adrian. He exhaled heavily. About 11 million. The room tilted slightly around me. $11 million. I stared at my son like I no longer recognized him. You borrowed $11 million? It's tied to projected franchise growth. With forged documents, his patience snapped completely. Do you think I wanted this? He hissed. Do you think I enjoy waking up terrified every morning? Terror. Finally. The truth slipped out. He was scared, desperately scared. But instead of stopping, he kept digging deeper. I swallowed carefully. You need to tell the investors the truth. Adrian laughed bitterly. That would destroy everything. No, I whispered. The lies will. He shook his head immediately. You don't get it. If investors panic now, the whole structure collapses, then let it collapse. His eyes widened in shock. Easy for you to say. Easy. The word hit me like a slap. Easy. There had been nothing easy about my life. Nothing easy about sacrifice. Nothing easy about watching my child become someone I barely recognized. I reached into my purse slowly and pulled out copies of the ownership documents. Adrian's face drained of color instantly. You found those? Yes. He stared at the papers silently. Then at me. For the first time in years, uncertainty appeared in his eyes. Real uncertainty. And finally, very quietly, I said the words that changed everything between us forever. You're going to fix this, Adrian. His jaw tightened. And if I don't, I looked directly into my son's eyes. Then I will. 3 days after my meeting with Adrian, he announced the biggest expansion deal in company history. A multi-state franchise partnership, press coverage, major investors, industry executives, social media influencers. According to the online articles, Adrian Garcia was about to become one of the fastest-growing restaurant entrepreneurs in Texas. Reading those headlines made me physically sick. Because I knew the truth hiding underneath all that success. A house of cards built on debt, lies, and forged signatures. Sophia wanted to act immediately after my meeting with Adrian. He's not stopping, she warned me. He's accelerating. But I still hesitated. Not because Adrian deserved protection anymore, because mothers never stop searching for one final chance to save their children without destroying them. Even when those children stop deserving softness. The morning of the signing event, I barely touched breakfast. My stomach churned constantly while I stared at Carlos's letter beside my coffee cup. If Adrian ever loses himself chasing money, status, or pride, you must protect him, even if he hates you for it. I hated how right my husband had been. Around noon, Sophia arrived at my apartment carrying 2 legal briefcases. You don't have to do this publicly, I whispered. Sophia looked at me carefully. Yes, she said gently. You do? I closed my eyes, because deep down, I already knew private conversations wouldn't save Adrian anymore. Pride had consumed him too completely. The signing event took place at an upscale hotel ballroom in downtown Dallas. The moment we arrived, cameras flashed everywhere. Massive digital screens displayed Adrian's company logo, while servers walked around carrying champagne beneath crystal chandeliers. Everything looked expensive, powerful, successful, fake. Sophia walked beside me calmly in a dark navy suit, while I clutched my purse tightly, trying not to shake. People barely noticed me at first. Why would they? Older women become invisible in places obsessed with wealth and youth. But then we entered the main ballroom. And Adrian saw me. Even across the crowded room, I watched the color drain from his face instantly. Beside him stood Rachel in another glamorous designer dress, smiling for photographers beside a giant banner announcing the franchise expansion. The second Rachel noticed me, her smile faltered too. Good. For once, I wanted them uncomfortable. Victor Lang stood near the investor table speaking with several executives. The moment his eyes landed on Sophia beside me, his expression darkened immediately. He understood what was happening before anyone else did. Adrian excused himself from reporters quickly and hurried toward us. What are you doing here? He hissed under his breath the second he reached us. Not Mom, can we talk? Not please, don't do this. Just anger. Sophia answered before I could. Mr. Garcia, we need a private conversation immediately. Adrian's jaw tightened. This is not the time. Sophia's voice stayed calm. Actually, it is exactly the time. Rachel stepped closer nervously. Adrian, he ignored her. Instead, he stared directly at me. You really brought a lawyer. The disappointment in his voice almost weakened me. Almost. Then I remembered him asking me not to embarrass him. I remembered the forged signatures, The lies, the shame, and suddenly my spine straightened. You left me no choice. Adrian laughed bitterly under his breath. You're really going to do this here? I looked around the ballroom slowly. Investors, journalists, executives, exactly the audience he cared about most. Maybe that was the only language he understood anymore. Sophia opened one of her briefcases carefully. Mr. Garcia, she said professionally, we are formally requesting immediate suspension of today's franchise execution pending legal review. Adrian stared at her in disbelief. You can't be serious. Oh, she's serious, Victor Lang said quietly while approaching us. The tension around us shifted instantly. Nearby conversations began slowing. People noticed something was wrong. Rachel forced a nervous smile toward a photographer before lowering her voice sharply. Can we not create a scene? Create a scene? Interesting choice of words from a woman who built her entire life around public attention. Adrian turned toward Victor desperately. This is a misunderstanding. Victor crossed his arms calmly, then clarify it. Adrian looked trapped for the first time since I'd arrived. Not confident, not polished, trapped. Sophia removed several folders and placed them onto a nearby cocktail table. Before any further financial agreements are signed today, she announced clearly, all involved parties deserve accurate disclosure regarding ownership and liability. Now people were openly staring. Whispers spread rapidly across the ballroom. I saw cameras slowly beginning to turn toward us. Adrian lowered his voice furiously. Mom, stop this right now. I looked at him carefully. No. That single word stunned him more than yelling would have, because mothers like me spend years saying yes. Yes to sacrifice, yes to forgiveness, yes to excuses. Men like Adrian stop believing no is even possible. Rachel stepped forward anxiously. Mia, this isn't helping anyone. I finally looked directly at her. You helped convince my son I was something to hide. Her face flushed instantly. That's not fair. No. My voice stayed calm. Then why was I seated near the kitchen while investors sat at the founder's table? Rachel opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Good. Adrian stepped between us immediately. This has nothing to do with Rachel. It has everything to do with choices, I answered quietly. Victor glanced toward Sophia. Tell them. The room felt impossibly silent suddenly. Sophia opened the first folder. Garcia Hospitality Group remains majority-owned under the legal authority of Mrs. Mia Garcia. Shock spread visibly across nearby faces. One reporter immediately lifted a phone. Adrian looked furious now. She's technically involved through legacy structuring. Only Sophia interrupted smoothly. No. Legally controlling. Rachel's face lost all color. Victor stayed perfectly still. He already knew. Sophia continued. Additionally, multiple financing agreements tied to recent expansion activities contain disputed signatures and unauthorized collateral obligations. Now, the whispers exploded fully around us. Fraud, ownership dispute, illegal financing. I could practically hear the rumors forming in real time. Adrian's voice cracked sharply. You're destroying everything! For a brief second, the entire ballroom froze, because beneath the expensive suit and polished image, he suddenly sounded like a terrified little boy again. And God help me, part of me still wanted to protect him. Then Sophia placed the forged documents onto the table. Mr. Garcia, she said carefully, did you or did you not authorize these filings under your mother's identity? Adrian looked around wildly now. At the investors, at the cameras, at Rachel, at me. Panic finally cracked through his confidence completely. And in that exact moment, I realized the empire my son built was already collapsing. We were simply the first people willing to say it out loud. The ballroom exploded into chaos. Whispers turned into frantic conversations almost instantly, as investors pulled out phones and executives stepped away from the tables to speak privately with legal teams. One reporter near the stage whispered loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear forgery allegations. Another immediately started typing. Adrian looked like he couldn't breathe. The confident businessman, who once stood proudly beneath spotlights, now looked trapped inside them. "Everybody needs to calm down," he snapped, suddenly raising his voice. But panic had already entered the room, and panic spreads faster than truth ever does. Rachel grabbed Adrian's arm tightly. "Fix this," she whispered harshly through clenched teeth. "Fix this. Not, 'Are you okay?' Not, 'Tell me this isn't true.' Just protect the image, protect the brand." Even now, that was all she cared about. Sophia remained calm beside me while investors crowded closer around the cocktail table covered in legal documents. Victor Lang picked up one of the forged agreements and studied it silently. Then he looked directly at Adrian. "Did you sign these under your mother's authority?" Adrian's chest rose and fell heavily. "It's not what it looks like." Victor's expression hardened immediately. "That's not an answer." Cameras started flashing now. I saw several reporters moving closer. One woman from a business magazine spoke carefully. "Mr. Garcia, are these accusations legitimate?" Adrian looked furious. "No comment." "Wrong answer." You could feel confidence in him collapsing by the second. Sophia opened another folder calmly. Due to unauthorized financial exposure and potential fraudulent liability, Mrs. Mia Garcia is formally invoking the Emergency Protection Clause under the original ownership structure. A man near the investor group frowned. "What does that mean exactly?" Sophia answered without hesitation. "It means all ongoing expansion activity is suspended, effective immediately pending forensic review." Silence hit the ballroom, heavy, sharp, final. Then chaos erupted again. "What, you're freezing operations? This deal closes today? Jesus Christ!" Adrian stepped toward Sophia aggressively. "You can't do this." Sophia never flinched. "We already have." She handed copies of the suspension filings to several attorneys standing nearby. I watched realization slowly destroy Adrian's face. This wasn't a threat anymore. It was happening. His empire was freezing in real time. Rachel suddenly turned toward him in disbelief. "You told me everything was secure." "It was supposed to be, she hissed. "Adrian, there are reporters everywhere. Even then. Even during collapse." Her first concern was publicity. Victor looked genuinely disgusted now. "You misrepresented ownership during investment negotiations," he said coldly. "Do you understand how serious that is?" Adrian looked around desperately. "No one lost money." "Not yet," Victor answered sharply. The words sliced through the room. Not yet, meaning disaster had only begun. I stood there silently while my son's world cracked apart around him. And honestly, I expected to feel satisfaction, revenge, justice. But instead, I felt grief, because no mother dreams about becoming the person who destroys her child publicly, even when that child leaves her no other choice. One of Adrian's managers hurried over looking panicked. "Adrian, several vendors are calling already. Someone leaked something online." Another employee approached moments later. "The bank froze the franchise transfer accounts pending legal review." Then another. "The legal department says expansion payroll may stop processing." Problem after problem. Faster and faster. The illusion of control disappeared within minutes. That's the thing about empires built on deception. They look powerful until truth touches them. Then suddenly, everything collapses at once. Adrian ran both hands through his hair violently. "This is insane," he muttered. Then finally, he looked at me, really looked at me, not as an embarrassment, not as an inconvenience, not as some outdated woman from his past. He looked at me like I held his entire future in my hands. And for the first time in years, I think he realized I always had. "Mom," he whispered hoarsely. That word almost broke me. Almost. Because suddenly I remembered him at 7 years old, crying after scraping his knee. At 13, asking me to teach him how to dance for school parties. At 17, promising he'd take care of me forever. The little boy I loved still existed somewhere beneath the greed and arrogance, but right now, he needed consequences more than comfort. Adrian stepped toward me slowly while the ballroom buzzed around us. "You're really doing this?" His voice sounded hollow. I swallowed hard. "No," I answered quietly. "You did this." Pain flashed across his face instantly. Everything I built was built on lies. His jaw tightened. "I was trying to save the company. You were trying to save your image." That one hit him. Hard. Because deep down, he knew it was true. Adrian's breathing grew uneven. "You have no idea how much pressure I've been under." "I know exactly how pressure feels," I whispered. "I raised you alone." Silence. Heavy silence. Then Sophia spoke gently but firmly. "Mia didn't shut this down to punish you, Adrian." He laughed bitterly. "Oh, really?" "She shut it down because if these documents reached federal investigators first, you could have faced criminal exposure." That stunned him completely. "What?" Sophia's expression remained serious. "Forgery tied to financial lending structures can escalate very quickly. For the first time all afternoon, real fear entered Adrian's eyes. Not fear of embarrassment, not fear of losing money, fear of consequences, fear of prison, fear of reality finally catching him." Victor stepped forward quietly. "She's right, son." "Son? Interesting." Victor sounded more compassionate toward Adrian in that moment than Rachel did. "You overexpanded," Victor continued. "Then you started manipulating disclosures to hold everything together." Adrian stared at the floor silently. Victor shook his head slowly. "You should have come clean months ago." "I thought I could fix it." "There's always one more deal," Victor said sadly. "One more investor. One more expansion. That's how people drown." Rachel suddenly stepped backward from Adrian entirely. I noticed immediately. Distance. Protection. Self-preservation. The exact opposite of loyalty. She looked at him differently now, not like a future husband, like damaged reputation. And Adrian noticed too. "Rachel." She folded her arms defensively. "You told me this was temporary debt. It was supposed to be." "You lied to me too." Adrian opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Rachel shook her head slowly. Then she walked away. Just like that. No comforting him. No standing beside him. No loyalty once the cameras stopped admiring them. And suddenly, Adrian stood completely alone in the middle of the ballroom. No investors. No girlfriend. No image left to protect. Just a terrified man surrounded by consequences. I watched tears fill his eyes for the first time since Carlos died. And when he finally spoke again, his voice sounded heartbreakingly small. "What happens now?" I looked at my son carefully. Then, at the frozen accounts, the collapsing deals, the empire we built together, now crumbling under truth. And quietly, through the pain of loving him, I answered honestly, "Now you finally face what you became." For the next 2 weeks, Adrian disappeared from public view. Business magazines that once praised him now ran headlines filled with words like scandal, fraud investigation, and corporate deception. Social media turned vicious overnight. The same influencers who once begged for invitations to Adrian's restaurants suddenly pretended they had always sensed toxic energy. People love success loudly, but they abandon failure even louder. I stayed mostly inside my apartment during those weeks, not because I regretted what I had done, because emotionally, I felt hollow. Shutting down the business had protected Adrian legally for now, but it also shattered the life he had built around himself. And despite everything, watching your child suffer never feels like victory. One evening, Sophia called with an update. Most investors are pulling out, she explained carefully. Victor is helping contain the legal exposure privately. I nodded silently. And Adrian A. Pause. He's cooperating now. Cooperating? Interesting how consequences suddenly create honesty. After hanging up, I stood at my kitchen sink, staring out the window for a long time. Rain fell softly across the parking lot outside. Carlos used to love rainy nights. He always said storms forced people to stop running long enough to hear themselves think. Maybe Adrian finally had no choice but to hear himself. 3 days later, there was a knock at my apartment door. I already knew it was him before opening it. Mothers always know. Adrian stood there looking nothing like the polished businessman from the ballroom. No tailored suit, no expensive watch, no carefully styled confidence. Just exhaustion. His beard had grown unevenly, and dark circles shadowed his eyes deeply. For a second, my heart broke all over again. Because beneath the arrogance, he still looked like my little boy. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. I stepped aside silently. Adrian walked into the apartment, slowly looking around like he hadn't truly seen the place before. The tiny kitchen, the worn furniture, the old family photographs. I suddenly realized something painful. My son had spent years climbing higher socially, while I remained frozen in the same small life. And instead of feeling grateful for how much I sacrificed, he started resenting the evidence of it. Adrian sat down carefully at the kitchen table. The same table where I once packed his school lunches. The same table where I counted coins to pay electric bills. The same table where I sold my future so he could chase his. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then, Adrian finally whispered, "I lost Rachel." I stayed quiet. She moved out 2 days after the shutdown. No anger in his voice. Just emptiness. She said she didn't sign up for public humiliation. That sentence told me everything about their relationship. Love built on image collapses the moment reality appears. Adrian rubbed his hands together nervously. Most of my friends stopped answering calls too. Friends? No. Business relationships disguised as friendship. Another painful lesson. Finally, he looked up at me. "Were you really trying to save me?" The question shattered me a little. Because beneath all the damage, part of him still didn't fully understand. I walked slowly toward the hallway closet and pulled out Carlos's old lockbox. Adrian frowned slightly. "What's that, something your father left behind?" I carried the box to the table and placed the folded letter in front of him. Adrian stared at Carlos's handwriting silently before picking it up. The room became completely still as he read. I watched his face carefully. Confusion first, then surprise, then guilt. Deep, crushing guilt. By the time he reached the end of the letter, tears had already begun sliding down his face. He read the final paragraph twice, then a third time. Finally, he whispered, "He knew." I nodded slowly. "Your father worried success would make you forget who you were." Adrian covered his eyes with one trembling hand. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I believed him. That was the tragedy. Greed rarely starts with evil intentions. It usually starts with fear, fear of failure, fear of looking weak, fear of losing status once you finally get it. Adrian lowered the letter slowly. I kept thinking one more deal would fix everything. His voice cracked. One more investor. One more expansion. I sat across from him quietly. At first, I just wanted people to respect me. The honesty in his voice hurt. Then suddenly, everyone expected me to keep growing. He laughed bitterly through tears. The bigger everything became, the more terrified I felt. I finally spoke softly. So instead of slowing down, you lied. He nodded. I thought if I became successful enough, nobody would ever look down on us again. Us. Interesting. Only now, after losing everything, did he include me again. Adrian's breathing became uneven. When Rachel started introducing me to investors and wealthy people, he shook his head slowly. I became obsessed with proving I belonged there. And I reminded you where you came from. He looked down instantly. Silence confirmed everything. Tears burned behind my eyes again. You were ashamed of me. No, he whispered immediately, but his voice lacked conviction. I stared at him quietly. Finally, after several painful seconds, Adrian broke. Yes, the word came out barely audible, but it still felt like a knife sliding directly into my chest. Adrian started crying harder immediately afterward. I hated seeing people judge you, he whispered desperately. Your clothes, your accent, the way wealthy people looked at you. And instead of defending me, I said softly, you joined them. That destroyed him. He bent forward, sobbing openly now. I'm sorry. Not polished, not defensive, not strategic. Real, raw, human. And somehow, that made this harder instead of easier. Because finally, after all the lies and arrogance, my son sounded like himself again. I became someone Dad would have hated, he whispered. No, I answered quietly. Adrian looked up slowly. You became someone your father feared. The distinction mattered. Because Carlos never believed Adrian was evil, just vulnerable. Vulnerable to ego, to insecurity, to the endless hunger for approval. I reached into the lockbox again and pulled out another item. A photograph, old and faded. Adrian at age 8, standing inside our tiny kitchen wearing one of my aprons while Carlos laughed beside him. Flour covered all three of us. We looked poor, tired, happy. Adrian stared at the photo for a long time before breaking completely. I don't even recognize myself anymore. I finally moved beside him then, not to erase consequences, not to rescue him from accountability, just to remind him he wasn't beyond redemption yet. I placed my hand gently over his, and for the first time in many years, my son held on to me like he used to when he was little. The weeks after Adrian's breakdown changed him more than success ever did. Not instantly. Healing never happens instantly, especially for people who spend years building their identity around money and approval. At first, Adrian still moved through life like someone waiting for the world to return to normal. But normal never came back. The luxury penthouse went first. I remember the day Adrian called me after meeting with financial advisors. I sold it, he said quietly. The silence afterward felt strange. That apartment had once been his greatest symbol of success. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Dallas. Private elevator access. Marble countertops that looked too clean to ever cook on. He used to post photos from that penthouse constantly. Now it was gone. A week later, he sold the Porsche too. Then the designer watches. Then the membership at the private club where investors used to shake his hand like he mattered. One by one, the pieces of Adrian's carefully constructed identity disappeared. And with every loss, he became more honest. That was the strange thing. The less impressive his life looked publicly, the more human he became privately. He started visiting me often after that, not to ask for money, not to manipulate, just to sit quietly at my kitchen table while I cooked dinner. At first, our conversations stayed shallow. Weather, legal updates, memories about Carlos. But grief has a way of slowly opening people. One evening, Adrian arrived carrying 3 old storage boxes from his penthouse. "What's this?" I asked. "My stuff," he answered quietly. Inside were photographs, notebooks, childhood drawings, old school awards, and dozens of papers Adrian apparently saved for years without mentioning. I sat cross-legged on the floor beside him while we sorted through everything together. That's when Adrian found one of the diner receipts I used to keep hidden in my purse years ago. On the back, in faded blue ink, I had written "skipped lunch again today." Adrian needs money for textbooks next week. Adrian stared at the note for a long time, then another. Electric bill overdue? Don't tell Adrian. Then another. Need new shoes but can wait until next month. I had forgotten those little notes existed. Adrian looked physically sick reading them. "You did all this?" I laughed softly. "Parents do what they have to do." "No," he whispered. "Not like this." He looked around my apartment slowly, as if seeing my life clearly for the first time. The worn couch, the old cabinets, the repaired coffee table Carlos once built with his own hands. And suddenly, I realized something painful. At one point, I caught him smiling accidentally. A real smile, not the polished business smile he used for investors. Just Adrian, my son. The kitchen smelled like garlic and roasted peppers by the time we sat down to eat. He looked nervous the entire meal. Finally, he put his fork down. "I need to tell you something." I waited quietly. When the business started succeeding, he stared at his plate. I became addicted to how people treated me. The honesty hurt. "People listened to me differently," he continued softly. "Respected me differently." I nodded slowly. "Money changes how the world responds to you." "Yeah." He laughed bitterly, and I started confusing attention with worth. Silence settled between us. Then Adrian whispered the words I think he'd been avoiding for years. "I judged you the same way rich people judged you." That confession nearly shattered me, because I already knew it was true. Still, hearing it out loud felt devastating. Adrian rubbed his face tiredly. "I hated watching people underestimate you." His voice cracked slightly. "But instead of defending you, I started trying to distance myself from anything that reminded people where I came from." I swallowed carefully. "You made me feel invisible." Tears filled his eyes instantly. "I know. No excuses this time. No defensiveness. Just accountability." That mattered more than he realized. Several days later, Sophia called with better news. Because Adrian cooperated fully after the shutdown, most criminal exposure would likely remain civil instead of escalating further. The business empire was gone, but his future wasn't completely destroyed. When I told Adrian, he sat silently for nearly a minute before speaking. "You still saved me." I looked at him carefully. "No," I answered softly. "I stopped protecting your lies. That distinction mattered too." Adrian nodded slowly. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and handed me something folded carefully. "What's this A-lease?" I frowned. "For what? There's a small restaurant space available in San Antonio?" I stared at him in surprise. "It's tiny," he said quickly. "Nothing fancy. Honestly, it's kind of falling apart. I laughed softly. Sounds familiar? A small smile appeared on his face, then disappeared just as quickly. I don't expect you to trust me again overnight. Good, because trust rebuilt too easily isn't real healing, Adrian continued quietly. But if I ever cook professionally again, his eyes filled slightly. I want to do it honestly this time. No investors, no luxury branding, no fake image, just food, family, truth. I looked down at the lease papers silently, then at my son. For the first time in years, he looked lighter somehow. Not happier, just real. The following Sunday, Adrian came with me to church for the first time since Carlos's funeral. People stared. Of course they did. Some recognized him from news coverage. Others whispered about the scandal. Months ago, that public judgment would have destroyed Adrian emotionally. Now, he simply sat beside me quietly. After service ended, an older woman approached him near the parking lot. "You're Mia's boy, right?" Adrian smiled softly. "Yes, ma'am. She used to bring homemade tamales for my husband when he had cancer," the woman said warmly. "Your mama's a good woman." I watched emotion hit Adrian like a wave, because suddenly, none of the investors mattered anymore. None of the luxury branding mattered. The only reputation truly worth having was the one built through kindness. As we walked toward the car afterward, Adrian stopped suddenly. "What is it?" I asked. His eyes looked glassy. "All those years," he whispered, "I kept trying to become someone important." I squeezed his hand gently, and he looked at me with tears finally slipping down his face. I already came from someone important. 1 year later, Adrian stood beside me in a small restaurant kitchen wearing an apron dusted with flour. And for the first time in a very long time, he looked happy. Not impressive, not powerful, not important. Just happy. The restaurant was nothing like the luxury empire he once built. No crystal chandeliers, no designer furniture, no influencers taking photos beside expensive cocktails. Just 12 wooden tables, warm yellow lights, handwritten menus, and the smell of fresh tortillas filling the air every morning. We opened the little restaurant in San Antonio under a simple name, Garcia Family Kitchen. No corporate branding team, no marketing consultants, no investors. Just family recipes, honest food, and second chances. The first few months were difficult, very difficult. Adrian had to relearn everything success had buried inside him. Patience, humility, gratitude. There were no assistants anymore. No private drivers. No employees fixing mistakes behind the scenes. If dishes piled up, Adrian washed them himself. If supplies ran late, Adrian drove across town himself. If customers complained, Adrian listened personally instead of hiding behind managers. And strangely enough, the smaller his life became, the bigger his heart seemed to grow. Every morning, Adrian arrived before sunrise to prep ingredients. Sometimes I would quietly watch him through the kitchen doorway while he chopped vegetables or kneaded dough exactly the way Carlos once taught him years ago. The same hands that once signed million-dollar deals now carefully rolled tamales beside me in silence. And honestly, I preferred this version of my son. One afternoon during lunch rush, a customer accidentally spilled an entire drink across Adrian's shirt. A year earlier, he probably would have snapped from stress and exhaustion. Instead, he smiled gently and said, "Happens all the time. Don't worry about it." I nearly cried watching that moment, because kindness tells you far more about someone than success ever will. The restaurant slowly developed loyal customers, not because it was trendy, because it felt real. Construction workers came during lunch. Teachers came after school. Families came after church on Sundays. People laughed loudly there. Children spilled salsa accidentally. Nobody cared about appearances, and somehow our tiny restaurant felt richer than Adrian's luxury empire ever did. One evening after closing, Adrian sat across from me counting receipts while old Spanish music played softly from the kitchen radio. The scene reminded me so much of Carlos that my chest ached. Adrian noticed me staring. "What?" I smiled sadly. "Your father used to sit exactly like that." Adrian looked down quietly. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he whispered, "I think he'd be disappointed in who I became." I shook my head gently. "No." Adrian looked surprised. "Your father would have been disappointed if you never changed." That mattered, because redemption isn't about pretending mistakes never happened. It's about choosing honesty afterward. Several months later, Victor Lang visited the restaurant unexpectedly. The entire kitchen froze when he walked in wearing jeans instead of expensive suits. Adrian looked nervous immediately. Victor smiled faintly. "Relax," he said. "I'm not here for business." He ordered enchiladas and sat quietly near the window, eating alone for nearly an hour. Before leaving, he approached the counter. "This place feels different," he admitted. Adrian nodded slowly. "It is." Victor glanced around the restaurant carefully. "People look comfortable here." That single sentence said everything, because Adrian's old restaurants impressed people. But this place welcomed them. Victor pulled out his wallet, then paused. "You know," he said quietly, "I invested in your old company because I thought you understood ambition." Adrian lowered his eyes. Victor continued, "But this—" He looked around the small restaurant warmly. "This tells me you finally understand value." After he left, Adrian stood silently at the counter for a long time. Then he looked at me. I almost lost myself completely, didn't I? I walked beside him slowly. Yes, no sugarcoating, no pretending, because healing built on denial never lasts. Adrian nodded. Then he surprised me by saying something I never expected to hear. "Thank you for stopping me." Tears instantly filled my eyes. Not because I needed gratitude, because finally, my son understood. Shutting down his business had never been about revenge. It was about rescue. Some people think love means protecting someone from consequences. But real love refuses to stand by while someone destroys their soul. Months later, on the anniversary of the grand opening disaster, Adrian closed the restaurant early. "I need to show you something," he said. He led me into the dining room where all 12 tables had been rearranged carefully. At the very center stood one larger table, decorated with candles and fresh flowers. A small framed photograph of Carlos sat in the middle beside folded napkins. I stared at it silently. "What's this?" Adrian smiled softly through nervous tears. "The founder's table." My throat closed instantly, because 1 year earlier, I had been hidden near the kitchen while strangers took my place. Now my son pulled out the center chair himself. "For the real founder," he whispered. I broke down crying immediately, not graceful tears, the kind that come from years of pain finally softening into peace. Adrian hugged me tightly while I cried against his shoulder. And suddenly, for one brief moment, I felt Carlos there with us again. Not in grief, not in regret, in healing. Later that night, after Adrian locked the restaurant doors, we sat together quietly beneath the warm lights while the kitchen cooled behind us. I looked around the little restaurant we rebuilt from the ruins of pride. No luxury, no lies, no pretending, just truth, family, love. And finally, Adrian spoke the words I think I had needed to hear all along. "I spent years trying to build a business people would envy," he said softly. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. But losing everything taught me something more important. "What's that?" I whispered. Adrian reached across the table and squeezed my hand gently. "The greatest thing I ever built was finding my way back to my mother." If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever forgiven someone who deeply hurt you? Or has someone ever helped save you from becoming the worst version of yourself? Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy emotional family stories like this one. And before you go, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world tonight.